Well, tonight I've got something interesting on the docket. It was in my episode 11, 5 episodes back, where I was reading from the book The Phantom World from 1751, where the author had a passage about a magic school in Lapland in northern Sweden, where parents would send their children to learn magical practices such as leaving their bodies and seeing what is going on in other parts of the world, astral projecting. And that stuck in my mind, and I wondered, where is this guy getting his information? So I went back and saw that he cited a book from 1673 called Laponia by Johannes Schefferus. We are going way back in time for this episode. Just a little background about this book. Johannes Schefferus was a professor of political science, among other things, from Strasbourg, and he moved to Sweden because Queen Christina, at the time, was inviting all sorts of scholars and intellectuals to Sweden to improve the country's reputation. I guess she wanted it to be an intellectual powerhouse. And this guy, Johannes Schefferus, stuck around. He lived his life there, and he wound up writing this book about the customs of northern Sweden. This book proved to be wildly popular, and at the time, it was the most comprehensive resource available on that part of the world. I have also been reading that Mr. Schefferus, or Professor Schefferus, did not himself travel to the north of Sweden. He instead just wrote and corresponded with various Lutheran clergymen from the northern parts who sent him reports of what was going on up there. So obviously this was not written with the strict standards that we would expect today if you're writing a book of anthropology. But it's 1673. We don't have a lot of sources to begin with from that time about that part of the world. So this is what we've got. And with that in mind, let's dive in. Chapter 11 of the Magical Ceremonies and Arts of the Laplanders. There is scarce a country under the sun whither the name of Lapland has reached by fame or otherwise, which does not always look upon this nation as greatly addicted to magic. It is this that has induced me to treat in this chapter of their magic, this being the second of the capital branches of their impieties, which are not as yet quite abolished among them. And to begin with the ancients, Jacob Ziegler has already in his time given them this character, that they are great artists in sorcery, and Damian Agoas gives us the same description of them. They are so well instructed in magic that by their enchantments they are able to stop ships when under full sail, not to mention here several other strange effects of their art. Neither are the northern writers differing from them in this point. These countries, says Olaus Magnus of Finland and Lapland, extending to the furthermost parts of the north, were in the time of paganism so well instructed in sorcery, as if they had been instructed in this damnable art by Zoroaster the Persian himself. Peter Claudi says of the Norwegian Laplanders, "They are such prodigious sorcerers that I much question whether they ever could or now can be matched in this art by any upon earth, though at the same time some of the Lapofini are worse than the Finlanders living near the seashore. This is the judgment of the historians concerning the Laplanders of the later ages, and considering they speak to the same purpose of the Biarmi, their predecessors, this verifies our former opinion of their being descended from the same original. The Biarmi, says Olaus Magnus, are very expert in witchcraft, For either by their looks, certain words, or some other diabolical arts, they know how to bewitch people, so that they take away the use of their limbs and reason, and many times induce them to lay violent hands on themselves. Saxo gives us an instance of this kind when he says, "The Biarmi, instead of arms, having recouped to art, did by their enchantments raise a storm, the brightness of the sun being soon overcast by the darkness of thick clouds and rains." The history of King Herod and Snorri Sturluson, speaking much to the same effect, leaves no room to doubt of the truth of it. 'Tis true, it must be confessed, that nowadays the Laplanders do neither so frequently nor publicly practice it as in former times, which makes Andreas Breus say the Laplanders are not now so much addicted to magical superstitions as in former ages. And not long after, the greatest part of the Laplanders are free from those magical superstitions, which is confirmed by Pucerus, who lived long before him. Nowadays, says he, they don't use so frequently their enchantments as they did before, because the King of Sweden has made most severe laws against them. Nevertheless, there are not a few among them who apply themselves to magic. If you desire to know the reason of it, besides those mentioned before in general, I can give you no better than that they think it absolutely necessary to defend themselves against the designs of their countrymen. This they frankly confess, and Peter Claudi relates it upon his own credit that the knowledge of those arts is looked upon them, by them, as absolutely necessary to prevent the danger of being hurt by others. For which reason, they have their certain masters and tutors, and parents bequeath to their children, as part of their inheritance, such spirits or demons as they have found serviceable to them. Concerning the first, Tornaeus says, "Some are instructed in this art and perfected by practice." And Peter Claudi, "They send their children to be instructed by the Laplanders, viz. In the magical art." Sturluson mentions a certain virgin called Gunilda, who was, by her father Odzar Huid, living in Hellogalana, sent to Motul, then king of the Finn Lapmark or Norwegian Lapland, to learn the Finland arts. He likewise makes mention of 2 Finlanders, whose magical artifices he relates at large. Nothing more frequent than that the parents are the masters who instruct their own sons in this art. Those, says Tornaeus, who have attained to this magical art by instructions, receive it either from their parents or from somebody else, and that by degrees which they put in practice as often as an opportunity offers. Thus they accomplish themselves in this art, especially if their genius leads them to it, for they don't look upon everyone as a fit scholar. Nay, some are accounted quite incapable of it, notwithstanding they have been sufficiently instructed, as I have been informed by very credible people. And Johannes Tornaeus confirms it by these words: "As the Laplanders are naturally of different inclinations, so are they not equally capable of attaining to this art." And in another passage, "They bequeath the demons as part of their inheritance, which is the reason that one family excels the other in this magical art. From whence it is evident that certain whole families have their own demons, not only differing from the familiar spirits of others, but also quite contrary and opposite to them. Besides this, not only whole families, but also particular persons, have sometimes one, sometimes more spirits belonging to them, to secure them against the designs of other demons, or else to hurt others." Olaus Petri Neorenius speaks to this effect when he says, "They are attended by a certain number of spirits, some by 3, others by 2, or at least by 1. The last is intended for their security, the other to hurt others. The first commands all the rest. Some of those they acquire with a great deal of pains and prayers, some without much trouble, being their attendants from their infancy." Johannes Tornaeus gives us a very large account of it. "There are some," says he, "who naturally are magicians, an abominable thing indeed. For those who the devil knows will prove very serviceable to him in this art, he seizes on in their very infancy with a certain distemper, when they are haunted with apparitions and visions, by which they are in proportion of their age instructed in the rudiments of this art. Those who are a second time taken with this distemper have more apparitions coming before them than in the first, by which they receive much more insight into it than before. But if they are seized a third time with this disease, which then proves very dangerous, and often not without the hazard of their lives, then it is they see all the apparitions the devil is able to contrive to accomplish them in the magical art. Those are arrived to such a degree of perfection that without the help of the drum they can foretell things to come a great while before, and are so strongly possessed by the devil that they foresee things even against their will. Thus, not long ago, a certain Laplander who is still alive did voluntarily deliver his drum to me, which I had often desired of him before. Notwithstanding all this, he told me in a very melancholy posture that though he had put away his drum, nor intended to have any other hereafter, yet he should foresee everything without it, as he had done before. As an instance of it, he told me truly all the particular accidents that had happened to me in my journey into Lapland, making at the same time heavy complaints that he did not know what use to make of his eyes, those things being presented to his sight much against his will. Lundius observes that some of the Laplanders are seized upon by a demon when they are arrived to a middle age in the following manner. Whilst they are busy in the woods, the spirit appears to them, where they discourse concerning the conditions upon which the demon offers them his assistance, which done, he teaches them a certain song, which they are obliged to keep in constant remembrance. They must return the next day to the same place, where the same spirit appears to them again, and repeats the former song, in case he takes a fancy to the person. If not, he does not appear at all. These spirits make their appearance under different shapes, some like fishes, some like birds, or others like a serpent or dragon, others in the shape of a pygmy about a yard high, being attended by 3, 4, or 5 other pygmies of the same bigness, sometimes by more, but never exceeding 9. No sooner are they seized by the genius, but they appear in a most surprising posture, like madmen bereaved of the use of reason. This continues for 6 months, during which time they don't suffer any of their kindred to come near them, not so much as their own wives and children. They spend most of this time in the woods and other solitary places, being very melancholy and thoughtful, scarce taking any food, which makes them extremely weak. If you ask their children where and how their parents sustain themselves, they will tell you that they receive their sustenance from their genii. The same author gives us a remarkable instance of this kind in a young Laplander called Olas, being then a scholar in the school of Lycksala, about 18 years of age. This young fellow fell mad on a sudden, making most dreadful postures and outcries that he was in hell, and his spirit tormented beyond what could be expressed. If he took a book in hand, so soon as he met with the name of Jesus, he threw the book upon the ground in great fury, which after some time being passed over, they used to ask him whether he had seen any vision during this ecstasy. He answered that abundance of things had appeared to him, and that a mad dog, being tied to his foot, followed him wherever he stirred. In his lucid intervals he would tell them that the first beginning of it happened to him one day as he was going out of the doors to make water, when a great flame passing before his eyes and touching his ears, a certain person appeared to him all naked. The next day he was seized with a most terrible headache, so that he made most lamentable outcries, and broke everything that came under his hands. This unfortunate person's face was as black as a coal, and he used to say that the devil most commonly appeared to him in the habit of a minister, in a long cloak, During his fits, he would say that he was surrounded by 9 or 10 fellows of a low stature who did use him very barbarously, though at the same time the standers-by did not perceive the least thing like it. He would often climb to the top of the highest fir trees with as much swiftness as a squirrel, and leap down again to the ground without receiving the least hurt. He always loved solitude, flying the conversation of other men. He would run as swift as a horse, it being impossible for anybody to overtake him. He used to talk amongst the woods to himself, no otherwise than if several persons had been in his company. I am apt to believe that those spirits were not altogether unknown to the ancients, and that they are the same which were called by Tertullian Paredri, and are mentioned by Monsieur Valois in his Ecclesiastical History of Eusebius. Whenever a Laplander has occasion for his familiar spirit, he calls to him and makes him come by only singing the song he taught them at their first interview, by which means he has him at his service as often as he pleases. And because they know them obsequious and serviceable, they call them Zvei, or Zvei, I don't know, which signifies as much in their tongue as the companions of their labor or their helpmates. Lundius has made another observation, very well worth taking notice of, viz., that those spirits or demons never appear to the women or enter into their service, of which I don't pretend to allege the true cause, unless one might say that perhaps they do it out of pride, or a natural aversion they have to the female sex, subject to so many infirmities. Those women who apply themselves to witchcraft among the Laplanders, and are by them called Cupikas, i.e. sorceresses, perform it by pronouncing certain words, magical characters, and other ceremonies, which they make use of to the detriment of those they have a grudge to. But it is time to proceed to their magical arts, which may be comprehended under 2 general heads. Under the first, those who make use of no instrument of all. The second may be subdivided into 2 parts according to the difference of the instruments they make use of. One comprehends all, where the drum is made use of, the other all such things to which they use knots, darts, spells, conjurations, and such like. We speak first of the drum, this being an instrument peculiar in his kind to the Laplanders, who call it canis, as Johannes Tornaeus, minister of Torna, informs us in his Treatise of Lapland. They used, says he, to perform their superstitious art by the means of a certain wooden instrument called by them canis, made after the fashion of a drum. And in his description of Sweden, the Laplanders call it quabdus or canis. We call it the Lapland or magical drum. This drum is made of wood. They make, says Olaus Petri, their drum out of a hollow trunk of a large tree, which must be of a pine, fir, or birch tree, growing in certain particular places and turning according to the course of the sun, as has been found by experience, and is confirmed by the testimony of Samuel Reen. The Lapland drums, says he, are made of pine, fir, or birch, but the tree out of which they are cut must grow in a particular place, and turn directly according to the course of the sun, not contrary. Which shows that Pucerus was in the wrong when he says, they make use of a drum made of metal, where it is to be observed that a tree is said to turn according to the course of the sun, when the grain of the wood, turning from the bottom to the top, winds from the right to the left hand, this being a token to them that the tree is acceptable to the sun, which, pursuant to the mysteries of their religion, they worship under the name of Thor. They make it out of one piece of wood, which must be of the root cleft asunder and hollowed out on one side, over which they stretch the skin. The other side being convex is the lower part, where is the handle to be holed by. This is made by 2 hollownesses on the outside of the body of it, the wood remaining betwixt them, being instead of a handle. That part on which the skin is fastened resembles a circle, approaching, however, more to an oval than circular figure, its diameter seldom exceeding half a yard, but is often less. They are covered with one skin only. On one side of this drum, says Olaus Petri, they cover with a skin, which makes Tornaeus compare them to our kettle drums, for, says he, they are instruments made after the fashion of our bokor, so the Swedes call a kettle drum, only they are of a more oblong figure. Though in another place he says very well that they differ also from them in this, that they are not altogether so round, nor so deep, and that the skin is not fastened to them with iron screws, but with wooden pegs. I have also seen some, the skin of which was not fastened by pegs, but sewed with the sinews of reindeer. Olaus Magnus did call it an anvil, but not very properly. These are his words. He beat the frog or serpent made of metal with a hammer, repeating his blows upon the anvil, by which that he understands nothing else but the drum will be shown hereafter. The engraver who made the cut before that chapter was questionless by those words misled into an error, which made him put a smith's anvil with a serpent and frog upon it, the smith's hammer laying by quite contrary to the intention of the author, and the nature of the thing was to delineate, the Laplander making no use of a smith's anvil, but of a drum, which, because they beat with a kind of hammer, this made Olaus call it an anvil. Upon the skin which covers this drum, they paint diverse figures in red, made of the bark of an alder tree, beaten and boiled for a considerable time. The skin, says Johannes Tornaeus, is all over painted with diverse figures in red, made with the bark of the alder tree. Samuel Reen agrees with him when he says, they stretch skin over the drum, painted with various figures of the bark of the alder tree. He also gives us a large catalogue of these figures as follows. About the middle of the drum they draw several lines quite cross, upon which they paint those of their gods that are most reverenced among them, viz. Thor, the supreme ruler of all the rest, with his attendants. Then Storjunker with his. These are placed on the top of the first line. Then they make another line, parallel to the former, but reaching only half across the drum. Here they place the picture of Christ and his apostles. All the figures above these lines, representing birds, stars, or the moon. Below them, in the center of the drum, hangs the sun, as the middlemost of the planets, upon which they put the bundle of brazen rings, as often as they intend to beat the drum. Under the sun they place the terrestrial things, and various sorts of living creatures, such as bears, wolves, reindeer, otters, foxes, and serpents, as likewise marshes, lakes, rivers, and such like. And I think I'll end it here for now. He's about to go into a much more detailed description of this drum, which is interesting, but I'm going to keep this one short. But we will probably pick this up again in a future episode, because after the drum's description, we're going to learn what the drum is used for and how it's used, and that should make an interesting episode on its own. So we will end here for tonight and return to the magic drum another day. Have a good one. Signing off.